Before this story begins, I want you to think about something. Think about the last time someone made you feel like you still mattered. Not as a mother, not as a grandmother, not as somebody's ex-wife or somebody's colleague. Just you, as a person, as a human being who still has wants and laughter and opinions and a whole life left to live. If you have to think hard to remember, this story is for you. Stay with me. The moving truck left at 2 in the afternoon. Adiz stood in the middle of her new apartment, 900 square feet, 3rd floor, hardwood that creaked near the bathroom, and listened to the silence. After 34 years of a house that was always making noise, always full of somebody's something, this quiet felt almost aggressive. She was 62 years old. She had raised 3 children in that house. She had cooked 10,000 meals in that kitchen. She had built a marriage in those rooms that she had genuinely believed, was the kind that lasted. It had not lasted. Clifton had sat her down on a Tuesday, a regular Tuesday. She'd been making jollof rice, and told her he was leaving. There was someone else. There had been someone else for 2 years. The woman was 39. Clifton was 61. He said he was sorry. He said it like sorry was a thing you could hand someone and walk away clean. Adiz had not cried in front of him. She had turned back to the stove and stirred the rice. She had waited until his car left the driveway. Then she had sat on the kitchen floor and cried for 4 hours. That was 14 months ago. The divorce was final. The house was sold. Her children were grown and scattered. Tabena in Houston, Chisholm in London, little Emeka who was not little anymore in Atlanta. And they loved her. They called. But they had their own lives, and she would not be a burden. She had told herself that so many times it had started to sound like a prayer. New apartment. New start. New quiet. She was putting books on a shelf when she heard it through the wall. A kettle. The low, building whistle of a kettle coming to boil. Someone was next door. She didn't meet him for 3 days. Day 1 she heard the kettle, twice, morning and evening. Day 2 she heard classical music, very soft, and what she thought was someone moving furniture. Day 3 she locked herself out. She had been carrying groceries and her keys slipped and the door clicked shut behind her, and she stood in the hallway holding 2 bags of plantain and a chicken and feeling deeply, specifically humiliated. The door across the hall, apartment 3B, opened. He looked to be in his late 60s. Korean. Silver hair cut neatly. He was wearing a cardigan that had seen better days and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked at her. He looked at the bags. He looked at the door. "You are locked out," he said. "I am locked out," she confirmed. "I have the building manager's number," he said. "Come in. Your chicken will suffer." She followed him inside because the chicken was already suffering, and also because he had said it with such matter-of-fact practicality that there was nothing awkward about it. His apartment was the mirror image of hers, same layout, entirely different feeling. Books on every surface. Architectural drawings framed on the walls. A drafting table near the window that clearly still got used. 2 chairs on the balcony visible through the glass door, facing out over the small garden below. 2 chairs, both with worn armrests, both positioned at the same angle. He handed her a phone and the building manager's number without ceremony and went to the kitchen. By the time she'd arranged for someone to come with a spare key, he had placed a cup of tea on the coffee table in front of her. Barley tea. Warm and nutty and nothing like what she usually drank. She picked it up anyway. "I'm Adiz," she said. "I just moved in 3 days ago." "I know," he said. "I heard the moving truck." "I'm Sung-min." He sat across from her in the armchair. "How long will the manager take?" 20 minutes. He nodded. And then, and this was the thing she would think about later, he simply settled into his chair like 20 minutes was nothing. Like sitting with a stranger in comfortable quiet was something he did all the time. No performance of hospitality. No anxious small talk. Just a man who was at home in his own space and had made room in it for her without fuss. She stayed 35 minutes after the manager arrived. She didn't entirely understand why. They did not become friends quickly. What they became, at first, was familiar. The way neighbors become familiar. A nod in the hallway. A held elevator. A brief exchange about the weather or the noise from the apartment above that both of them agreed was unreasonable. But something was accumulating. Adiz noticed that Sungmin went out every morning at 7, to a small garden 3 blocks away. She noticed he always came back with something. A handful of herbs, sometimes flowers, once a bag of soil he carried on his shoulder with the unbothered ease of a man who had been carrying things his whole life. Sungmin noticed that Adiz cooked every evening, and that whatever she cooked filled the entire hallway with something that made him stop outside his door for just a moment before going inside. They were 6 weeks into this careful, quiet familiarity when she knocked on his door. She was holding a bowl. "I made too much agusi soup," she said. "I don't know why I always make too much. My children are not here. You don't have to eat it. But it will go to waste, and that bothers me." Sungmin looked at the bowl, then at her. "I will eat it," he said. "Thank you." The next morning there was a small container outside her door. Doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean paste stew, she would learn later. A sticky note on top in careful handwriting. "You made too much." "So did I?" And something between them shifted. "Here's what I need you to understand about 2 people who have lived this long. They are not young people in old bodies. They are not waiting for the same things young people wait for. They don't need someone to complete them. They have already been complete and broken and repaired so many times they've lost count. What they need, what Adiz needed and what Sungmin needed, was simpler and harder than romance. They needed to matter to someone again. Watch what I mean. It started with small things. Adiz had a shelf that needed anchoring. She had the bracket, had the drill, had done it herself 100 times in the old house. But she stood there on a Saturday morning and thought, and she couldn't explain this, "I don't want to do this alone." She knocked on 3B. "I need an extra pair of hands," she said. "The shelf." "You don't have to." "Show me," said Sungmin. He held the bracket while she drilled. He didn't take the drill from her. He didn't offer to do it himself. He just held the bracket steady and told her a little left, and there, that's level, and afterwards stood back and looked at the shelf like it was a thing they had built together, which it was. He stayed for tea. Adiz noticed the way he moved in her apartment, carefully, like a guest who respected the space. She noticed he looked at her books. She noticed that when she laughed at something he said, something in his posture changed. Just slightly. Like a man who had forgotten that he was capable of making someone laugh, and was remembering. 2 weeks later, Sungmin knocked on her door. "I am making galbatang," he said. "Beef short rib soup. It takes 4 hours. I always make it for 2 people out of habit." He paused. Something moved behind his eyes that he did not fully explain. "Will you come for dinner?" "What time?" said Adiz. 6. "I'll bring rice," she said. "My rice is better than yours. I say that with respect." Sungmin looked at her for a moment. "We will test this theory," he said. Her rice was better. He admitted it over the second bowl. She told him the galbatang was the best soup she had eaten in years, which was true. They sat at his table until 9 o'clock talking about their children and their cities and the countries they'd each left pieces of themselves in. He had grown up in Busan and come to America at 30 to study architecture. She had grown up in Enugu and come at 24 with a nursing degree and a suitcase and more nerve than she'd known she had. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Korea. Every day," he said. "Less than I used to." He said it simply. She understood it completely. She went home at 9 and stood in her apartment and thought, for the first time in 14 months, that the silence felt different. Not smaller, just less like an accusation. The clocks went back in November, and everything got darker earlier, and Adiz did not do well with early dark. She hadn't told anyone this. It wasn't something she advertised. But the darkness coming at 4 in the afternoon felt like a door closing, and some days she would stand at her window and feel the gray settle in her chest like weather. Sungmin noticed. He didn't say, "You seem sad," or "Is everything all right?" in the careful, walking on eggshells way people did when they didn't know what to do with someone else's quiet pain. He simply appeared at her door on the 3rd dark Tuesday with a small electric lamp, warm-toned, gentle, and a bag of what turned out to be sweet potato and ginger tea. "For the dark," he said. "I also do not like November." Adiz looked at the lamp, at this man who had noticed without being told. Her throat did something complicated. "Come in," she said. They sat in the warm lamplight and drank the tea, and she told him about November. About how after the divorce was final, November had been the month she'd understood it was real. The month she'd packed the last boxes. The month she'd understood that 34 years could end on a Tuesday while jollof rice was on the stove. Sungmin listened the way she had come to understand. He listened, completely, without rushing to fill the space, without offering solutions to things that did not need solutions. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My wife died in November," he said. 3 years ago. Her name was Ji-yeon. He stopped. Started again. She was the funniest person I ever knew. People don't expect that when they meet a quiet man. They don't expect that his wife made him laugh every day for 38 years. Adiz was very still. "My son is in Seoul," Sungmin continued. "He has his life. His family. He calls when he remembers." He said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. "I have the garden. I have my drawings. He looked around the apartment. At the books. The drafting table. The balcony. I have learned to be enough company for myself." "That's not the same as being enough," Adiz said quietly. Sungmin looked at her. "No," he said. "It isn't." They sat together in the lamp's warm circle until the dark outside stopped feeling like a punishment. She went home at midnight. The latest she had stayed. She did not sleep for a long time. "Let me stop here for a moment. Because I need you to understand what is happening between these two people. What is really happening, before we go further. This is not two lonely people settling. This is not two people grabbing at each other because the alternative is silence. These are two people who have learned, the hard way, exactly what they need and what they will not accept. Who have earned the right to be particular. Who know the difference between comfort and love because they have had both and lost both. What is growing between Adiz and Sungmin is not desperation. It is recognition. Stay with me. This is where it gets beautiful." December came. Adiz's daughter Chisholm called from London and said she wasn't coming for Christmas. The flights were expensive, the children were small, maybe in the spring. Tabena called from Houston and said the same. Emeka, her youngest, was coming for 3 days, but not until the 27th. She would spend Christmas Day alone. She did not tell Sungmin this. She didn't want it to be a project. Didn't want to be someone's obligation. But Sungmin had been watching her since the November conversation with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read the things people didn't say. On Christmas Eve, he knocked on her door. He was holding a small potted plant, a paper-white narcissus, white flowers just opening. "In Korea we don't celebrate Christmas the same way," he said. But Ji-yeon always liked the flowers this time of year. She said they smelled like something was about to begin. He held the plant out. "I grew this from the bulb. In the garden. It took 3 months. Adiz took it carefully. Looked at the white flowers. 3 months. He had been growing this for 3 months, since September, since before they had eaten galbatang together and talked until 9 o'clock. She didn't know what to do with that information. It sat in her chest like something that needed room. "Are you alone tomorrow?" he asked. She almost said no. Old habit. Never be a burden. Never need to visibly. "Yes," she said. "Then come for dinner," he said. "I am making something. It will be too much for one person." She arrived at noon because he had said noon, and she brought the rice because that was established now, and he had made galbi, grilled short ribs, and japchae, and a soup she didn't know the name of but ate 2 bowls of. They ate at his table, and then they moved to the balcony because the afternoon sun had come out, thin December sun that was more light than warmth, and they sat in the 2 chairs and looked out over the garden and talked about Christmas. His Christmases in Busan as a boy, which weren't Christmases really but winter celebrations, his mother's cooking, the smell of snow. Her Christmases in Enugu, the harmattan dust, the way her mother's whole house would fill with family until there was nowhere to sit. "I miss that," Adiz said. "Not the marriage. The fullness. I miss a full house. I miss someone knowing where I am," said Sungmin. "When Ji-yeon was alive, she always knew where I was. If I was late, she worried. If I was sad, she could tell from how I opened the door." He looked at his hands. "Now I could disappear for 3 days, and no one would know." Adiz turned to look at him. "I would know," she said. "I hear your kettle every morning. If I didn't hear it, I would knock." Sungmin looked at her. Something in his face changed. She had said it without thinking. But she did not take it back. They sat in the afternoon light, and let the words settle between them, and something that had been growing slowly for 4 months began, in that moment, to take up more space. She was the one who looked away first. I need you to see what just happened. She didn't say I love you. She didn't say I have feelings for you. She said, I would know. I would notice your absence. I would come for you. After everything she'd been through. After a man who had stood in her kitchen and made her feel for 2 years like she was invisible, like she was furniture in her own marriage, she told this man, you are not invisible to me. Do you understand why that matters? Hold on. We're almost there. January. Adiz was on the phone with her sister Ngozi when she heard Sung-min come home. It was 9 at night, and he was later than usual. She tracked this without meaning to. The sound of his key, the close of his door, the kettle that followed. The kettle did not follow. She finished her call, washed her dishes, listened. Nothing. She waited 30 minutes, which she told herself was not waiting, and then she knocked on 3B. Sung-min opened the door and he looked, for the first time since she'd known him, undone. Still put together in the surface way, the cardigan, the neat hair, but his eyes were somewhere far away. My son called, he said. He is not coming in March. He is not coming this year. He stopped. He has decided it is too far. Adiz looked at this man who had grown a flower for 3 months before giving it to her, who made soup for 2 out of habit and had been pouring the second cup down the sink for 3 years, who had been so careful, so self-contained, so determined to be enough company for himself. She stepped inside without being invited. She went to his kitchen and filled the kettle and put it on the stove and found the barley tea without asking because she had watched him make it 4 times and she knew where he kept it. She heard him sit down in the living room. She did not say anything yet. The kettle boiled. She poured 2 cups. She brought them to the living room and sat across from him and held one out. He took it. They sat. He sounds like Clifton, she said finally. My ex-husband. When someone decides that what you give them is ordinary, is just what's owed, they stop being able to see it. Sung-min looked at the cup. What your son is missing, she said carefully, is his father making him soup, growing him flowers, sitting in the particular quiet with him that you are very good at. She paused. That is his loss, not yours. Sung-min was very still. You see me, he said, quietly, almost to himself. I see you, she said. A long silence. Adiz. He looked up. I want to tell you something, and I need. He stopped. I am not a man who speaks quickly about certain things. I have been. He seemed to be searching for words and not finding the right ones, and then he gave up looking for perfect words and said the true ones instead. I have not looked forward to something every day in 3 years, he said. Not until you moved in next door. The room was very quiet. Outside, January pressed against the windows. Adiz thought about the Tuesday the jollof rice was on the stove, about the boxes, the empty house, the 14 months of reconstructing herself from a woman who had been made to feel ordinary into a woman who remembered she was not. She thought about a man who had made room for her without fuss, who brought her lamps in November, who grew flowers in September for a December he couldn't know she'd spend alone. I need to tell you something too, she said. And I also do not say these things quickly. Sung-min waited. I stopped believing that someone would choose me, she said. Just me. Not who I was to someone. Not what I could do. Me, as I am, at 62, with my particular opinions and my too loud laugh and my November sadness. She looked at him. You make me feel chosen. Even when you were just sharing soup. You make me feel chosen. The silence after that was not empty. Sung-min set down his cup, crossed the small space between the chairs, sat beside her on the couch. He took her hand, held it in both of his. The careful, deliberate way he did everything. I am choosing you, he said. If you will let me. Adiz looked at their hands, at this man next to her. She thought about all the years she had spent being invisible to someone who should have seen her. And she thought about how sometimes, not always, but sometimes, if you are still there when it arrives, life turns a page. You can choose me, she said. He didn't kiss her that night. He was not that kind of man, and this was not that kind of moment. He held her hand, and they finished their tea and talked until very late about their children and their regrets and the things they still wanted. She wanted to visit Enugu again. He wanted to see the house in Busan where he grew up. And at 2 in the morning, Adiz went back to her apartment. But she was smiling when she closed the door. And in apartment 3B, for the first time in 3 years, Sungmin made 2 cups of tea and drank them both. Spring came. The garden 3 blocks away woke up and Sungmin went every morning as he always had. But now sometimes Adiz went too. She had her gardening gloves and her opinions about which plants were in the wrong location, and he listened to these opinions with the expression of a man who did not always agree, but enjoyed hearing her think out loud. Her son Emeka visited in April. He was 31 and thoughtful, and he noticed the way his mother smiled when someone knocked on the door. He noticed the container in her fridge with Korean writing on it. He raised his eyebrows, and she said, "My neighbor." And he said, "Uh-huh." And she said, "Don't uh-huh me." And they both laughed, and it was the first time since the divorce that laughing with her child felt uncomplicated. Emeka met Sungmin briefly in the hallway. Sungmin shook his hand and said, "Your mother's rice is remarkable." And Emeka looked at his mother, and she looked back at him, and something was understood. On the last evening of Emeka's visit, after he had gone to bed, Adiz sat on Sungmin's balcony. She had been on the balcony before, many times, but always in her own chair, the chair that had clearly always been hers by unspoken agreement, the same side she always sat on, comfortable and established. This evening, without thinking, she sat in the other chair, the worn one, the one positioned at a slightly different angle, the one that, she understood the moment she sat in it, had been Ji-yeon's. She realized it immediately. Looked at Sungmin. He was standing in the balcony doorway. He had seen. She started to rise. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "No," he said. She stopped. Sungmin came and sat in her chair, the chair that was now hers. He looked out over the garden for a moment. "Ji-yeon would have liked you," he said. "She had opinions about plants too. She would have argued with you about the garden and then decided you were right and not admitted it for a week." Adiz was very still. "She is not in the chair," he said quietly. "She is," he touched his chest. "She is here. She does not need the chair. You can sit there." He looked at her. "I want you to sit there." Adiz looked at this man, at the garden below coming into spring, at the life that had brought her here, the 34 years, the Tuesday, the jollof rice, the boxes, the first night in this apartment when she had stood in the silence and not known yet what it was making room for. "Tell me about her," Adiz said. "Tell me about Ji-yeon." And Sungmin smiled. A full smile, unguarded, the best one she had ever seen on his face, and he told her. About the woman who had made him laugh for 38 years. About her terrible sense of direction and her extraordinary cooking and the way she had said his name when she was pleased with him. He talked for a long time, and Adiz listened the way she had learned he listened, completely, with her whole self. And when he finished, he looked at Adiz in Ji-yeon's chair in the spring evening light, and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For asking," he said. "Nobody asks anymore. They are afraid it will make me sad. But she was my life. She should be spoken about." "She should be spoken about," Adiz agreed. She reached across and took his hand, the same way he had taken hers in January. The same steadiness. They sat like that until the garden disappeared in the dark. In June, Sungmin's son Jahun called from Seoul. He called on a Sunday morning, and Adiz happened to be there, having breakfast, because Sunday breakfast had become a thing. She moved to give Sungmin privacy, and he shook his head. "Stay." So she stayed. She heard one side of the conversation. It was careful, a little formal, the particular awkwardness of a relationship that had let distance become habit. But at the end, she heard Sungmin say, "I have someone I want you to meet. Sometime, when you're ready to come." After he put the phone down, he sat for a moment. "He is coming in September," Sungmin said. "Sungmin." He said. He paused. He said he was sorry for not coming, that he had been, he looked for the word, avoiding, because being here made her absence too loud. Adiz nodded slowly. She understood this in her bones. The way grief could make you a coward without meaning to be. "And what did you say?" she asked. "I said I understood." He picked up his tea. "And that the absence is less loud now. And that I hoped he would come and hear for himself." Adiz looked at this man across the breakfast table. This man who gardened and made soup and grew flowers for 3 months and held hands with the deliberateness of someone who understood what holding on meant. Less loud, she said. Much less, he said. And he looked at her across the table with an expression so direct and uncomplicated and full that she had to take a breath. Jehun came in September. He was 41 and looked like his father around the eyes. He was cautious at first, polite, slightly formal, watching. Adiz understood this and made no effort to charm him. She was herself. She argued with Sungmin about the garden in front of Jehun because that was normal now, and she wasn't going to perform a different version of herself. She made jollof rice the first night. She watched Jehun eat 2 bowls without comment and counted that. On the second evening, Jehun found her on the balcony alone. She was in Ji-Yun's chair. He stopped. He told me about the chair, Jehun said carefully. That you sit there. I can move. No. He came and sat in Sungmin's chair. Looked out at the garden. My mother liked balconies, he said after a moment. She always said she could think better when she could see outside. Your father told me about her, Adiz said. She sounds remarkable. Jehun was quiet for a moment. He talks about her? To you? Often, Adiz said. I ask. Jehun looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, some locked thing opening. He hasn't talked about her, he said slowly. Not since she died. I thought he stopped. I thought it was too painful. Sometimes it is, Adiz said. And sometimes the person isn't there yet who can hold it with you. Jehun was quiet for a long time. Thank you, he said finally. For being here. He gestured, not quite finding the words. For this. Thank you for coming, she said. He needed you to come. When Sungmin came out to find them both on the balcony, he stood in the doorway and looked at his son and the woman he had chosen, and something in his face did a thing that Adiz would carry with her for the rest of her life. The look of a man who had thought the fullness was over, discovering it wasn't. On the last morning of Jehun's visit, Sungmin made breakfast for 3. He stood at the stove and made mayak guk, seaweed soup, the kind his wife had made on birthdays, the kind that meant celebration and care and you matter. And Adiz set the table, and Jehun sat and watched his father cook. He hasn't made this since, Jehun said quietly to Adiz. I know, she said. She didn't entirely, but she could see it in how carefully Sungmin was moving. What this meant. They ate. They talked. At the door, Jehun hugged his father, really held him, the way Adiz had a feeling he hadn't in a long time, and said he would come again at Christmas. Sungmin held his son for a moment with closed eyes. After Jehun left, they stood in the apartment in the quiet. Thank you, Sungmin said. He wasn't looking at the door anymore. He was looking at her. For what? You know for what. Adiz did know. She had sat in Ji-Yun's chair and asked about Ji-Yun and held Sungmin's history carefully and made space for his son and never once asked him to choose between the life he'd had and the one still coming. Because she understood. She understood what it was to have a whole life that needed to be honored, not erased. Come here, he said. He had never said that to her before. Direct, specific, unambiguous. She crossed to him, and he put his hands on her face the way you hold something you intend to keep. He kissed her. It was unhurried. It was the kiss of 2 people who understood that time was both shorter than they'd thought and longer than they'd feared. It was quiet and certain and full. When they separated, he kept his hands where they were. I was not expecting you, he said. When you moved in next door, I was not expecting anything anymore. Neither was I, she said. And now, Adiz looked at his face. This face she had learned over 12 months. Every expression, every version of his quiet. The way he looked when he was thinking, and the way he looked when he was moved, and the way he looked at her across his breakfast table on Sunday mornings like she was a thing he still couldn't quite believe was real. Now, she said, I expect Sundays. I expect the kettle. I expect someone who knows where I am. She paused. I expect you. Sungmin's hands moved to her shoulders. Then he pulled her close in the simple, complete way of a man who had decided, and held her there in the middle of his apartment on a September morning while the garden outside moved in a slight wind. 2 people. 2 full, complicated, surviving lives. Finding out, against all reasonable expectation, that there was more. That winter, Adiz went back to Enugu for the first time in 11 years. She called Sungmin every evening. He told her about the garden, about the book he was reading, about the new drawing he'd started. She told him about her aunties and the food and the noise and the particular Enugu light she had missed without knowing how much. "I want to take you there," she said one evening. "Someday." "I want to go," he said, without hesitation. "And I want to go to Busan," she said. "I want to see the house." A pause on the line. "Okay," he said, and she could hear, even through the phone, the particular smile. The unguarded one. "We will go to both." She came home in January to find a paper white narcissus outside her door. A new one, white flowers just opening. A note in careful handwriting. It said, "Welcome home." She stood in the hallway and held the flower and thought about a man who paid attention, who noticed the dark in November and brought a lamp, who made soup for two out of habit and had finally found someone to share it with. She knocked on 3B. He opened the door. And Adiz, who had sat on a kitchen floor in the ruins of a 34-year marriage and tried to understand how she would begin again, Adiz walked in. Like she had always been going to end up here. Like this was the door she had been walking toward. Home. If this story found you, if it found the part of you that needed to hear that it is not too late, that chosen does not have an expiry date, that someone can still surprise you, please leave a comment. Tell me what it meant to you. Subscribe for a new story every week. And remember, sometimes the person who changes everything is right next door. You just have to open the door.